Kyrgyzstan is a small nation in Central Asia bordering China. It is also Central Asia's only democratic country. In this picture is the former president of Kyrgyzstan. Recently, he decided to resign. He said in a formal statement, "I'm not holding on to power. I do not want to remain in the history of Kyrgyzstan as the president who shed blood and shot at his own citizens. Therefore, I've decided to resign." Someone said, "It feels like he is slapping right on the CCP's face." Someone said his voluntary resignation exposed a long-time lie that the CCP has been telling to intimidate the Chinese people, that once the CCP is no longer in power, tens of thousands of people will lose their lives. Someone said the CCP leaders would think that we can fabricate history and tell the Chinese people that we were intending to save them from danger by opening fire on the rioters. Someone commented he dared to surrender power partly because he was relatively innocent and was not afraid of being liquidated by the people. While on the other hand, some dictators have committed unpardonable crimes. Once they lose power, they may indeed lose everything, including their own lives. In our earlier episode, we shared about recent news regarding what appeared to be a new rule regarding circumventing the Great Firewall, that as long as one attempts to use VPN to bypass the firewall, regardless of for what purpose, it would be illegal. And in fact, Beijing is clearly tightening its control over ordinary people's access to information, especially from overseas sources, and thus further violating their right to know. On October 29th, according to the Hunan Provincial Commission for Discipline Inspection, Chen Zehui, former executive deputy mayor of Changsha City, was expelled from the party for buying books and magazines with so-called serious political problems from overseas and bringing them back to China without permission. Someone shared that on October 27th, a local tycoon dropped 30 million yuan all across Chongqing city from a helicopter. Someone commented, "Some people say that money may become a burden after one encounters a crisis of faith. But I want to ask, at the final stage of life, can money buy you what you want the most?" Someone said perhaps doing so can make him feel easier, so that he may not shoulder the heavy burden and feel the strong sense of guilt before leaving this world. Someone shared that after being infected with COVID-19, an ordinary Chinese man jumped off the 21st floor of a building and passed away. Someone commented, "Ever since I purchased medical insurance in China, I've become increasingly afraid of being sick because I can hardly afford the associated costs each time." Beijing recently released a propaganda movie titled "My People, My Homeland," claiming that in China, even people from rural areas don't need to even worry about not being able to afford the medical costs after contracting a serious illness because of Beijing's excellent medical insurance policies. But someone commented after watching it and said, "The storyline is too fake and is clearly nonsense. In China, medical care is not only not free but also extremely expensive. It is one of the so-called pillar industries in China as is crucial to the Chinese economy in the eyes of Beijing. A serious illness can take away everything from you, of course including your life. The so-called medical insurance is just a joke, as many drugs are not even covered. The ones that are also overly expensive, but are intentionally sold at a price of thousands or even tens of thousands of yuan. Then the so-called medical insurance would only cover a certain percentage of the overall price. It's a real shame that this movie was produced. Ge You's acting skills are good, but the plot is too fake." Someone shared a photo of his grandmother in Shanghai in 1937 to show that her life back then was perhaps much better than now. Someone said, "My elders often said that before the Communist Party appeared, they still had food to eat. But after the CCP came and brought along the disastrous 3-year famine, they began a period of starvation." Someone shared a summary of things that the CCP has been lying about and children have been brainwashed about ever since their younger times. He said, "I once believed that the 8th Route Army defeated the Japanese invaders under Mao's leadership, but later found out that it was the Nationalist Army that defeated the Japanese army with help from the US. I once believed that the Red Army went to northern Shanxi and embarked on the so-called Long March to fight against Japan, but later discovered that there were no Japanese troops in northern Shanxi. They were just trying to escape. I once believed that Mao's campaign of so-called land reform was meant to protect the Chinese people, but later I discovered that most of the landlords' properties were earned from their own hard work, but they suffer heinous persecution by Mao. I once believed that the Great Famine in the 1960s was the result of natural disasters and the Soviet Union's bullying, but later I discovered that the weather in those years was actually smooth, and the famine and starvation were caused by Mao's agenda of so-called surpassing the Great Britain and catching up to America and his disastrous Great Leap Forward campaign. I also once believed in the so-called resist U.S. aggression and aid Korea, exemplar figures like Lei Feng, slogans such as serving the people and the American people are living in dire straits and so on, but only found out later that those were all lies. I once believed that the US attacked Iraq for oil, but later discovered that Iraq had already signed oil and oil-fueled contracts with the CCP. I once believed that the Iraqi people supported Saddam Hussein and he won 100% of the votes every time, but later I discovered that was not the case at all, as his statue was overthrown by the people the day after his regime fell. I also once believed that the people of the GDR or German Democratic Republic or East Germany were indeed the real rulers of the country. But later I discovered that they strive to flee GDR and come to the Federal Republic of Germany or the West Germany, even when risking their life. I once believed that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was indeed, as its name said, a democratic nation, but later discovered that it is the most authoritarian place on earth. Someone commented, when the epidemic situation was at its worst, only in one country, state media publicly stated that it is necessary to prevent dust from drifting over from mainland China into its borders because it contained the virus. This country was North Korea. Someone said, in fact, the CCP's so-called old friend Russia also excluded the Chinese people amid the COVID-19 outbreak. Someone recalled North Korea was also the first to shut its border with China, but ironically, Sino-DPRK relations have improved amid the pandemic, while on the other hand, when the Trump administration banned travel from China to the US, however, it was severely criticized. Many people have blamed Trump for the COVID-19 atrocities in America. Someone made a timeline of the pandemic situation in the US from January through April and compared responses from the Trump administration and state governments, especially those of Democratic legislators. As of April, the governors of 8 of the 10 states with the most severe COVID infections are Democratic. Former New York Mayor Giuliani shared a set of data showing that the growth rate for death in America went up more in the last years of Obama-Biden than in any of the Trump years. And this includes 2020, the year of the pandemic. Someone noted that Giuliani directly referred to the virus as the Chinese Communist COVID. On October 28th, French President Macron announced that, in view of the severe situation of the epidemic in France, a new national lockdown will be implemented. Someone felt that the spread of COVID-19 throughout the world follows the countries and cities closely related to the CCP. Someone shared a map showing the interconnected relationships between the CCP and France. It's quite clear that Beijing has truly infiltrated France in the military, political, media, as well as many other realms of society. This chart highlighted the relationship between France and the P4 laboratory in Wuhan. These are French companies acquired by Beijing. He also said that the CCP should be held accountable for the global pandemic and its consequences. He also reviewed evidence suggesting that the CCP has maliciously purchased masks around the world and has been engaging in a wide range of activities to destroy the virus sample since January. He also tried to compare the CCP with Nazi Germany and said they are very similar except that Nazi Germany did not have nuclear weapons. He also said that French mainstream media concluded that the CCP has no responsibility for the global pandemic and its consequences. He also shared this chart to show the relationship between the former French Prime Minister and the CCP. And he also noted, communism has had a heavy influence on politics in France ever since it reached the nation in 1773. Someone shared his thoughts regarding the differences between freedom and liberty and said, Freedom is the traditional way of describing inalienable human rights to act, speak, think, following one's own will, while liberty implies liberation and is anti-traditions. He shared this picture which shows the famous French painting called Liberty Leading the People, and the word used is liberty instead of freedom. Someone shared a picture of the Statue of Liberty in New York and said, clearly, liberty, not freedom, was used in its name. It was said that the first international that Karl Marx founded played an important role in the US Civil War. Marx once also commented that the American Civil War was a continuation of the American Revolutionary War. In our earlier episode, we shared a clip of Donald Trump Jr.'s speech at the Republican National Convention. In it, he also used freedom instead of liberty. Perhaps connecting these clues together can help provide a different perspective looking at the differences between freedom and liberty.
Child, we will take you in. Child, we will bring you home. You'll be a flower that sees the spring. Soon a dove flying high